Welcome to Veritas Group's webinar, Moving Your Fundraising Efforts from Transactional to Transformational. I'm Rebecca Huron, the Director of Content Marketing and Learning at Veritas, and I'll be working behind the scenes to help you as Jeff and Karen are presenting today. So let's go ahead and begin the webinar, and I am going to pass it over to Jeff for introductions.
All right, thanks, Rebecca. Hey, everyone, I'm Jeff Schreifels, and I'm principal at Veritas Group.
Who am I today?
I know. Just let everyone know, both Karen and I traveled from Boston down
And
to
Rebecca.
Philly. Yeah, and Rebecca from Boston this morning. So we got back here in time for the webinar, but we might be a little punchy. Who knows?
Maybe.
Anyway, we are glad you're with us. This is going to be a fun webinar. And Karen, take it away.
Great to be here. I am the Senior Director of Client Engagement. Read my title. Love my work at Veritas. I've been here for 12 years. Before that, it was the universities in all different parts of the nonprofit sector and roles. And I have coaching and counseling degrees. So I love having these webinars and being able to really talk and dive into ways in which we can communicate or relate or build those relationships that are meaningful with donors. So I'm excited about this webinar today.
All right. Okay, so before we get started on today's topic, I just wanted to share a bit about who we are at Veritas. Some of you on the call may be pretty familiar with us, but for those who aren't, we're a passionately relationship-focused and grounded in a data-driven approach. So this dynamic is critical to the system, structure, and strategy that we have found to be successful in mid, major, and planned giving programs. Something that we recognize during our time in the direct response world is that data is powerful. So when we found that most major gift programs were missing that critical piece, we knew it had to be a part of our approach. So over the last several years, we've had the opportunity to work with thousands of major gift officers, mid-level officers, and planned giving officers, many on a weekly basis, through our consulting work. So we know firsthand how this approach has helped organizations of all sizes and focuses to create authentic donor relationships that will lead to a stronger donor pipeline and greater net revenue. Also, the lack of data was really concerning, and it still amazes me how many nonprofits do not adequately consider the data piece of this work. And that's why we've worked so hard to ground our approach in objective fact, not our personal opinion. We've formed our recommendations through insight from analysis of millions of donor records and the work with thousands of fundraisers and leaders. And we've gotten to work with some pretty phenomenal organizations over the years who have helped us learn and develop our strategy and approach.
Thank you, Jeff. So let's talk about what we're doing today. We're going to really dive into how do we build those deeper donor relationships. We're going to talk about what is that transactional, relational piece about. We're going to look at how do we have transformational conversations that build those relationships, and then a peek into our free donor file assessment, which gives you an incredible amount of information about your donor base and what's possible. All right, remembering your purpose. Let's dive into that just for a minute. Perfect time on the 14th of December to have a little check-in on purpose. And I love this. What do donors want? I think about so many times we're thinking about the money and getting to our goals and all the tasks and everything, and to step back just for a moment today and think, donors want to solve problems. They have a passion to change something in the world. And they want transparency and authenticity and a great partnership with us. And they want to see how their gift is making a difference. And so that's when I think about calling a donor up to talk to them, just even thinking about that can shift how I'm thinking and feeling and approaching that conversation. Okay, what is transactional fundraising? And I thought I would give it, you can kind of read those bullets. So I thought I'd give a little example. So if I'm a donor who's given, excuse me, $10,000 to an organization, maybe the last couple of years. And with the transactional situation, it would be maybe their back-end system doesn't even tell them that I've made the gift for 3 weeks. I don't hear a thank you for 4 weeks. Potentially, no one's talked to me about why I'm giving or my interest or passion. And so I'm just getting sort of updates, maybe newsletters, but nothing's personalized. Nothing feels like it's really for me. And no one's telling me the difference I'm making. And they come back to me that year asking for 25,000 or 30,000 because that's their goal to increase across the board. And so that would be a transactional experience. I don't have any relationship connection to my passion and what's happening in the organization. So what happens, Jeff, next is maybe I would give 20,000 the next time, maybe, but you haven't engaged me, you haven't connected with me, and I'm probably a donor that has potential for 300,000. However, I'm probably never going to do that because it's just a transaction between us, and I'm not really bought into feeling the difference I'm making. I haven't been connected. I'm not in a partnership, and so I would probably stay at the next level. So you don't really retain and increase donors. A lot of donors either go away, give less, or don't give what they potentially could give. And then lastly, so what if I'm the same donor, I've just given 10,000 to another organization for the last couple of years, and they've asked me about my passions and interests. They're telling me the difference I'm making in the area that I care about. They are reporting back in really creative, interesting ways, and they're engaging me. And I see that like they're introducing me to other people that are like maybe the corporate people or the event people, and thinking of ways I can engage and be a part of the organization and partner. And they're coming back and saying, hey, I've got some exciting new work happening in the area you care about. Would you like to hear about it? So in that journey, I'm very much a partner. So that would be the difference between the two.
Okay, awesome. So we believe, because we see it every day with our clients, that the right system is absolutely critical to create a transformational relationship with your donors. Remember, the purpose of major gifts is to secure funds and fulfill the donor's passions and interests. Your structure needs to be created to support the dual purpose at all times, and you must keep it in balance. Overly focusing your effort in either area causes the other side to suffer. The structure of your major gift program is designed to address the last few slides we just talked about. The key components of a major gift structure are having a dedicated major gift officer who is working with a caseload of donors to learn the donor's passions and interests, qualify, and ultimately to secure net revenue. And we recommend that caseloads be 150 donors, no more. Every donor on your caseload should be qualified. And we'll talk about that in a bit. And lastly, your MGO should be creating a 12-month communication plan and revenue goal for every donor on their caseload. This structure is designed to help you create meaningful relationships with your donor, reach or exceed your goals, and maximize your efforts. And when you're implementing a disciplined structure and like this, you have the space and focus to be transformational and relationship focused in your strategy and your approach. Now, before I talk about the what and the how of qualifying donors, I want to say why it's critical that any donor in your portfolio needs to be qualified if you want to move from transactional to transformational. The bottom line is that most donors who make a major gift actually don't want a relationship with you or your organization. In fact, 2/3 of those donors don't. But most major gift portfolios that we have analyzed are full of them. This means that major gift officers are wasting their precious time on donors that don't even want to be contacted. And this is why we've created this qualification cycle. It helps you focus your time on the right donors. And honestly, it's the best thing you can do as a major gift officer to find joy in your work. Why? Because you are now just working with donors that want to relate to you. And that's a game changer. But the qualification cycle takes time and it requires commitment, especially if you're building a new caseload from scratch. This system was originally inspired by proven sales strategies and includes 7 touch points. The key here is that this is an average. You'll have donors that you qualify earlier in this process, And you may have some donors that you want to do a few extra touch points for. As soon as you have a two-way interaction with the donor that indicates that they are open to a deeper relationship with your organization, you then move them into your caseload and out of this qualification process.
You know what I love
You-
about this too, Jeff? I'll just jump in. Is I think about those donors on your caseload that maybe your boss wants you to pursue because they have high capacity, they're someone well known in the community, they're famous, whatever it might be. And if you've shown that you've done this qualifying process and they're not interested, then you can let that go. Like, haven't you got a hold of them yet? What's happening? And you're spinning your wheels year after year with people who really aren't interested. So it helps in incredible ways.
Yep. You notice that we have some follow-up attempts in a couple of areas here. Those follow-ups are not a one and done outreach, and they aren't done by any one specific communication tool. Remember, this process takes time and it takes discipline. We typically find that it takes fundraisers 3 to 4 months per cohort of donors that you're qualifying if you're building a portfolio from scratch. What we mean by that is that you may begin with a group of 20 donors and send your introduction letter. From that point, it takes 3 to 4 months to get through all those steps. You'll be doing multiple cohorts at the same time, so there's some overlap in that time. But this process does take significant effort and the organization from the fundraiser. Now, something important to keep in mind as you are working through the qualification cycle is that you have to have the right expectations of engagement. It can be really challenging to get a lot of voicemails or get no's. But if you have the right expectations going in, then it's all in the right perspective. Remember what I said earlier. We find that only 1 in 3 donors will say yes and engage with you. Keep that in mind as for your expectations.
Jeff, this time of year is a perfect time to be qualifying, right? Because donors tend to respond to you. And we just had a webinar last week, and a woman said, yeah, I did what Jeff said. And I started calling my donors between 6 and 7 p.m. just to thank them. I was worried they'd be mad I was interrupting dinner. Nobody was. And it was an opportunity then to see if they had a little more time to talk. And then I could ask if they're interested in getting information from me and learning more. And so I could qualify them through that thank you. And so just having that little space in the evening really helped her qualify like 10 donors that week. So
that's awesome.
It's incredible.
So part of the structure that we talked about with major gifts is tiering the major gift caseload. And tiers are fluid, and you will have donors moving up and down in tiering as you get to know them, or make updates to contact information and begin identifying your Tier A group. Your Tier A will have the fewest donors and be where you are spending the greatest amount of time. Here's an example of what that looks like. Now, your numbers won't look like this, but it shows how you have a much smaller group in Tier A, where you have much more personal and more strategic moves in comparison to Tier C. Now, it's also critical that you set a goal for every donor in your caseload. This should take into consideration past giving and any other information you may know about the donor's giving trends. As you can see in this example, there's a donor whose business is hurting, so their goal is lower. And there's a note about a special 1-year gift, so there's clear documentation about why that goal is lower. We highly recommend creating a budget goal, which is what you'll submit to finance. Then set an aspirational goal where you're dreaming big about that donor and pursue that. And then another part of our system is creating a 12-month communication plan. In other words, how are we actually going to meet the goal? So here are just 2 examples, and you can see how there's a mix of different kinds of touch points. Well, where you'll see when the fundraiser expects to ask for a donor for a gift. It can feel overwhelming to think about creating 12-month communication plans for 150 donors, but I encourage you that it's actually much simpler than you think. When you start with an ask, fill in impact reporting, add cultivation steps, and include some personal connections, you'll be well on your way to completing the plan. In major gifts, you are adding purposeful touch points. We do not recommend that you remove a major donor from your direct response program unless they specifically ask to be removed. As you can see in these lists of touch points, you'll be reporting back regularly to the donor on their gifts, sharing information about the organization, and As you learn about the donor's interests, you'll start sending more specific information. There's a huge variety of touchpoint types and methods for delivering these touchpoints. But remember, we have a number of traditional ways to communicate to donors, but there's also a number of digital ways to connect depending on your donor's preferences. Each of these touchpoint types can be a way to deepen the relationship and build trust, but you need to be focused on creating meaningful connections when using them. Meaningful connections are ones that move the donor relationship forward. Every one of these can be done meaningfully or not, so you need to have the right intention with how you build your plan. So to bring this all back together, let's talk through the objectives of your Major Gifts fundraising program. We've talked about the system and structure of how we do Major Gifts, and this is why. Your objective is to learn the passions and interests, increase net of your donors, increase net revenue from major donors, creating plans for transformational giving, and ultimately, you're developing strong, meaningful relationships with your donors that are built on trust. That's what you're doing. That's it. I want to take a moment to reinforce that this process does take time and dedication. One of the biggest challenges we hear from fundraisers about why they aren't able to stay on top of their plans is that they're getting pulled away from their donor work, which has the highest ROI and greatest importance for the organization, to do non-caseload work. Often this non-caseload work takes up significant time or actively pulls fundraisers away from working with their donors. It's critical, especially for the leaders here today, so I'm talking right to you, to serve as protectors of the major gift officer's time and focus. Your role is to address roadblocks, support the work the MGOs are doing, and be their advocate across the organization. This can look like a conversation saying that the MGOs are going to prioritize meetings with donors at events so that they shouldn't be assigned any teardown responsibilities. It's also important for everyone to especially leaders to understand the amount of time this work takes, because it's truly an investment in strategic relationships. And looking at the work we do with clients every day, we typically find that building out an entire plan or a caseload of 150 donors takes about 2 weeks. This includes creating individual goals and strategic communication plans for every donor. But this is a living process, so there is constant updating, reviewing, and adjusting of the plan, which counts for another 2 to 4 hours a month. We highly recommend allowing your MGOs to focus their time almost exclusively on building and managing meaningful relationships with their donors. Remove as many internal meetings from their schedule as possible. Take off things that have crept onto their plates. If you do this, you'll see enormous benefits in your donor relationships and your revenue.
Yeah, I was thinking, Jeff, we talked about how it's only like 18 days in a month that we have to do donor work because of holidays, other things happening, events, and it's not very many days. And so if you have a plan, you know where you're going with each donor, and you have a goal, and you've been creative, had some time to be creative about how you're approaching building the relationship, that's going to make a huge difference.
Huge difference,
Yeah,
yes.
because everything always gets pushed aside because, all that thinking and doing and following up is hard work.
That's right.
It's hard work. All right, so let's talk a little bit about having those transformational conversations. And to me, this is about how do I build relationships and what does that look like? So let's dive in, and we'll use an ask as an example, but this model can be used for all donor communication, teenager communication, partner communication. It's a really great tool. So first, I want to just take a minute and talk about how it helps us a great deal with how we make up stories in our head. So we may be making up a story about, oh, this donor just gives to this program, or they'll only give to that capacity, or maybe they've given to something for a few years and I've decided that's their why. I've never really asked. Mm-hmm. And so we're unable to build those relationships because we're coming from an assumption. And if I'm trying to guess and figure out, when is it time to ask for a bigger gift and how do I do that? So this permission-based asking model, and Jeff, you can go to the next slide. It helps you with permission to ask everything you want to know, to think creatively and have an open mind and a curious mind. And through that process, the donor feels heard and seen, and their response to fundraisers, even at trying a piece of this, is like, wow, I've never had such a meaningful conversation with a fundraiser. That really was different. So this is just going to be an overview. And if you're interested, we have plenty more we can share with you. So you'll notice a couple things. It's circular because conversations are not a step done, right? You get in there and you sort of see where it's going, and you may have to go back around the circle a few times. And so it's not necessarily a linear process. And also there's two roles you're going to play, and I'll explain those in just a minute when I get to one piece of it, when Jeff brings it back. So
hold on.
We lost it. So, okay, you can go to the next slide, Jeff. So you connect is that simple thing of you want everybody in the room, their head in this space, whether it's on the phone or Zoom or in person. It's, a little chit chat. How'd the holiday go? What are your plans? And then some of the challenge can be when a donor's really chatty and they love to tell you all the details about their 16 grandchildren, you don't know when to start the meeting, right? And it feels like you're being rude. So this model gives you those tools to facilitate. So every arrow is a yes, no question to move to the next section. So go ahead, Jeff. So the next one would be, okay, I know you have a full day. You're ready to get started. So you practice, you come up with your own language. What's that transition language? Let's get the meeting started. In the align, you're checking in. All right, before we get started, I want to just check. You still have, 30 minutes to meet. Thank you. And we were going to talk about a really big, bold, exciting opportunity today. Does that still work for you? So you've already told the donor, I'm going to bring you a big ask, right? They know before they come. And you've already told this donor, all your donors, that, if I'm going to ask, I'm going to tell you I'm going to come to ask. So they'll know, like, this meeting is about learning about your passions and interests, or this meeting is really getting to know more about how you prefer to connect with the organization in meaningful ways. Mm-hmm. So then the other two things in align, I'm going to play two roles today. One is I'm your partner. And so I really need, it's as important for me to hear what's really meaningful and working for you as what isn't and what you're confused by. So please, give me your feedback. And two, if it's okay with you, I'll kind of keep us going and facilitate. Does that work? So all of a sudden their anxiety can all right, this meeting has a purpose. I know where I'm going. She's going to keep it going. Great. All right. So you've set the stage. Now you're going to go to the curious piece. So you're getting into the material now. So, I'm touched to hear, last time we spoke, you shared your story about your sibling and their terminal illness and how it inspired you to give. And I know I've been sending you materials over some time. So I'd love to hear more about, your heart for cancer research and how this is impacting you. Is it okay if I ask you some questions? So you're kind of setting the stage for now a time to really dive in and be curious. So the curious is a time to ask open-ended questions, to be listening. So I would probably start with things around their passion for what I've been sharing with them. I would ask them about what drew them the most, what was confusing, and really kind of unpack their passion around it, their interest in it, and have some time to really have their hearts connect with what I'm getting ready to ask them to give, right? So it's grounded in their understanding and their hearts connected. All right, so now we're gonna ask permission to ask. So we've shared, you've shared with me your passion for our cancer research program, and we've talked about some of the expansion plans. Are you ready to talk about your interest in contributing to this need? So they know, okay, the ask is coming, right? And then if they have more things they want to talk about, they can oh, wait, I'm not quite sure about this or that. So it's so respectful. And also for you, you're not like, okay, this conversation's going great, but I've got 5 more minutes and I need to transition to the ask, or we're going to leave here and I'm not going to have made my ask. And so it gives you that way to do that as well. And then the ask could be, are you the same ask we've all been trained to do, basically, right? Is, would you be interested in contributing $100,000 to support this cancer research project we've been discussing? And then you're quiet, right? You give them a chance to process, think, not because you're trying to win, but because they got to think about, who they have to talk to, where they would get the money, if that's a possibility, and you give them some space to think that through. So if they said yes, you give them, obviously you give them the big thank you, you're thrilled, you're excited, this is so amazing. And then you want to talk through some of the logistics, because sometimes you can get so excited, then you leave and you're like, oh gosh, I didn't ask. How are you even
Thanks a
doing
lot.
this?
Bye.
And then I got to chase them down. So then we go back to a line. And we'll just skip that one, Jeff. Go back to a line, and then we're like, okay, how do you want to make this happen? What's your timing? And you get all that set up, right?
Okay.
And then you move to celebrate at the end. And you say, before we go, would you mind if I just shared a little story of how you're making such an impact? Jeff, you're doing great today with your slides.
You know what's happening? I'm not doing anything. Ever since I downloaded the new OS, whatever it is for Mac, it has voice commands. And so whatever you're saying is making the slides do what it's doing.
I want to figure out what it is. Okay.
I don't know what you're
We'll
saying.
play with that.
It's creating that.
So the celebrate would be like a little story about how research was done and figured out this one solution and how it helped this one family and this kid, named Sue. So it's like tying it into the real human piece. Now think about this. If I came and asked for the 100,000 or the 5,000 or the 1,000, and the donor's like, wow, this has really not been a good year for me. I'm not able to do that. I'm always ending in that celebration, because you know how it's that little bit of like, you want them to not feel bad, but it's a little awkward. And so when you come to the celebration, before we wrap up, I might take a few minutes and share with you the incredible difference you're making. And I've had donors come back and say, wow, I felt so honored and celebrated because I felt horrible to say I couldn't do as much. And as soon as I have revenue, I'm coming back and giving as much as I can. So you end and celebrate.
Love it.
So that walks you through that. Any more slides after that from me, Jeff?
I think that's it.
All righty.
Well, as you can tell, we're big believers in the power of a relational approach to fundraising, which will help you create transformational relationships with your donors and, in the end, get you transformational gifts for your organization. Really, the goal in any fundraising operation is to create a system and structure that will help your donor give to their full capacity. You can achieve that by removing barriers, changing your mindset, and remaining diligent about the health of your donor pipeline. Now, before we get into questions, I want to quickly share about a free assessment we offer that can help you identify where you may have hidden problems in your donor file and where a transactional mindset may be impacting your fundraising efforts. This is a one-of-a-kind assessment that is offered to all our organizations that qualify. It's completely confidential, and we don't ask for any identifying donor information to complete the assessment. For organizations that qualify, here are the benefits you'll receive in this assessment. And it's pretty amazing. You will be able to know exactly how are your donors behaving, where are there areas of opportunity, and where could your program be in the next 5 years? So, if you'd like to get this process started, we can head over to the link on the screen or go to our website under resources and select free assessment. Remember, if you truly want to move from transactional to transformational, it starts with understanding how your donors are currently behaving. The data tells us the story of where you are and allows us to show you where you could be if you created that proper structure. So, Rebecca, I think now is a great time to start answering questions if you have any.
Yes, we do. And everyone, feel free to keep putting questions in the Q&A box, and we will try to get to all of the questions if possible. I did want to just make a couple of notes just to address a couple questions that were in the chat. So just as a reminder for everyone, there is going to be a recording of this webinar, and the slide decks will be sent out tomorrow. So you'll get that via email. And I also put the link in the chat for the assessment that Jeff was just talking about so that you have that. Jeff, do you want to maybe pull down the slides? Or I'm like, maybe my voice will pull down the slides. Like, I don't know what to
Only
say.
mine will.
Only Karen's will today. And so we can answer some questions. So there was a question around the qualifications for an organization to receive the assessment. And I know that we try to make sure that this is accessible to as many organizations as possible, but there are some things that we need in order for it to be statistically significant. So would you be able to share a little bit about what we are looking for there?
You mean the actual number of
Yeah,
records?
like,
I
mhm.
think you have to have at least over 500 donors that are giving 500 cum a year or something like that, Jeff.
Yes. Yeah. At least 500 donors that are giving over 500 cum.
Mhm.
And you could see the specs is also that we want to at least be able to have 4 years of data that goes back 4 years. That
Mhm.
because that will help us determine forecasting and just look at how those donors have been behaving over time.
Mhm. And then if for some reason you don't have that, or maybe we're a newer organization, we don't have 4 years of data, we do have a pipeline assessment that's under our white papers on the website that is just a great way to start getting an idea of maybe where you have clogs in your pipeline, where you maybe are having issues moving people from one stage to the next in their giving, or moving from a direct response program into more of the relational. So that is a resource that anybody could use kind of regardless of how much data you have. All right, moving into the questions. We had a question from somebody saying, as a newer member of my development team, how do I make sure fundraising is not becoming transactional when the CEO and the CDO treat donors in that way?
Hmm. Where
Starting you
do
off with
we
an easy
begin
one.
to tell the story?
It's funny because tomorrow, Karen and I are going to do a podcast on what makes great leaders, managers for nonprofits. So we've been talking about this very issue. Um, yeah, it's unfortunate that leaders have not embraced the idea of transformational or relationship fundraising. It's all about the money to them. And I think for you that are working with those donors, but you have leaders that don't think the way that you do, you have to continue to tell them why it's so important um, to look at your donors as real partners and not just going after the money. Why going after the relationship or building a relationship will result in more revenue, and that if we go after money, we might get a little money at first, but we will lose the relationship and the long-term value of those donors over time. And so you can play a role of being an educator and continue to reinforce this. But the reality is also that sometimes leaders don't want to listen, and you can do all the things that you can do. So first of all, I'd say control what you can control. So do all the things that you know is the right thing to do with donors. But if at the end of the day your leaders are not moving, then maybe you have to move to a place where you can actually live out the way you know you're supposed to be working with donors. And that may be at a different organization. And that's what we have to say to the folks who are struggling with that.
I would just add, I think it's such a norm that most leaders don't realize it's transactional. And so, I mean, we have white papers if they're open to any learning. And it can be like, hey, I've been really learning and growing and developing, would love to share some things with you. You can model it. This is what I'm learning. This is how I'm building relationships. And then you can show the impact if you're there over time. So, it's so like mind not what was the word we kept using yesterday? It's like mind bending for a lot of people at first. It takes them to some time to realize, oh yeah, that is a transaction. Takes a while to unpack it. So also, if you have people a little more open, be patient and continue to have those conversations.
Thank you both. I know, like, culture is such a huge part of that. I was actually wondering, Jeff, if you wouldn't mind sharing that story about the donor that you sat next to on the plane, because I think that's such an important illustration of how a culture like really can have a huge impact that you just don't even realize. And, maybe for some of you, like even sharing this story would be helpful.
The one that I was flying to Midland, Texas with.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was several years now, but I was flying from Dallas to Midland, Texas, and it's really like an hour-long flight. I sit down and someone comes to sit next to me, and he's tall guy, dirty jeans, dirty shirt, fingernails all kind of dirty, like, oh, I'm thinking this guy, is working for the oil rigs. And so I sit down and immediately says, "Hey, well, what do you do?" And I say, "Well, I get to work with organizations to help them develop major gift programs." And he's like, "Oh, major gifts." He goes, "I've made a few of those major gifts." And I was like, "Okay, never judge a book by the cover. Never." Because turns out this guy is a multimillionaire who actually owns some of the oil wells in Midland, Texas. And here I was sitting next to this major donor. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to ask him all kinds of questions. This is like gold for us, right? So I say to him, okay, I want to know a story. What was the best experience you had as to get a major gift, and what was your worst one? He goes, wow, no one's ever asked me that question. He goes, this is fascinating. He says, well, I'll tell you the worst one first. And he said, I gave a gift of $1.5 million to a very famous university. I'm not going to say who it is, but it's a very famous university. And I gave 1.5 million to build this new athletic facility that will pay for the wide receivers coaches' offices. How specific is that, right? But I said, well, that's kind of weird. Like, why just the wide receivers coach? He goes, well, when I was a kid in high school, I played wide receiver. And I wasn't that great. Like, I didn't go on to college, but I loved the experience so much that when I knew I could have this opportunity to help my university with this, I jumped on it. And I was really excited, to give this gift. And so I said, well, why is this the worst experience? He goes, Jeff, I gave that $1.5 million. I never heard back from them. He goes, well, I got a thank you letter, but it was like he's like, it's one of those form letters that just thanks you. I can't imagine getting a form. Thank you for your $1.5 million gift, but that's what happened. He got this form letter, never heard from anyone. No one. Can you imagine? And so I was like, a couple months later, he was actually going to be in the area. So he calls them up and says, hey, would you mind if I come and see the offices that my $1.5 million built? And they said, oh yeah, come over. We'll give you a tour. So he comes to the university. They put some freshmen, to give him a tour of the building. No one from development, no one from the president's, nothing. This little kid takes him up to the wide receivers coach's office, shows him around. No coaches come to talk to him. No one, nothing. He said he was just beside himself. And so he said, Jeff, I had planned to give a large percentage of my estate to this university. And after that visit, I talked to my wife and we just cut them all out. Now, this guy was worth multiple millions of dollars. Here was a university that couldn't thank, report back, show any kind of human response to this donor, who for that donor, that was a meaningful gift. Remember, he had a whole story about why he gave that gift. And that university just It's like a $25 gift to us. That's basically how he felt. Cut him up. I said, okay, tell me about your best one then. He goes, okay, he lives near Nashville. And he said, I gave a 1.5, same amount, $1.5 million gift to a veterans center who's building a brand new building. And I gave the 1.5 million. And Jeff, he says, I'm not a person that cries very easily, but I got 5 different letters from them, from the president, the board of directors, but also from 3 of the veterans who told me how much this meant to them. He goes, it was just, I was just crying so much. You wouldn't believe it. And then he says they invited me to the grand opening, and they invited all of my family. And I have all this family in where I live. So I got to invite all of them to come to that day. And it was just beautiful to be with all of them, to share in this great thing that we were all able to do. And, you know, now they invite me to come in and volunteer and hang out with the guys. So I do that, whenever I can. The president calls me maybe once a month, just checking in with me, just giving me updates on what's happening over there. And I love it. And it's the best experience I've ever had giving a gift. I felt like I made a difference. And so he goes, you know what's going to happen when I die? I haven't told them how much it's going to be, but they are going to be floored. I mean, he liked talking like big stuff like this, but it was just an amazing experience for him. And so it's so simple. Here's somebody who's given a gift, but the culture of the university was one, you know what? We don't have time for that. We're not going to report back. We're not going to thank that. Well, we got other things. That's how the donor felt. And it's so easy to do for nonprofits. They do this all the time. So you get a gift. Maybe it's not 1.5 million. Maybe it's $1,000 gift for your organization. Maybe it's a $5,000 gift. For that donor, that's a big deal. And to not be thanked properly, to not be reporting back the impact, you can see what that can do to a donor. And remember, every donor has a story why they do this, why they give that gift to you. They have a story. You just haven't found it yet, but they do have a why behind that's why they give. So
I love that story so much. Thank you. All right, going back to the questions. We have some really great ones, just kind of thinking about all of this. And so one question is related to when we're kind of talking about the amount of time that you really need to invest when you're creating a donor strategy that is really going to be transformational. And so there was a question of just kind of how do you maybe politely address or decline or educate other departments like marketing or other requests that might come through? How do you decline those meetings or decline those requests that come in and help educate them about why you need to do that?
I'll start, Jeff. To
yeah.
me, you got to do it ahead of time. So like, okay, everyone, in January, this date we'll have our books closed out. And in that little window, we're not sure what gifts are in yet and what's really happening. This is how I'm going to be focusing my time. I'm going to be looking at where we are, where I want to go, who I need to take off my caseload who's no longer qualified, what my plans are. And the reason for that is the more I can be strategic and think ahead, the more it's easier for you all to also provide resources. And so I can be letting you know ahead what I'm needing, and we can collaborate better. And I can build those authentic relationships with donors. So this is what I'm going to do, these days, these blocks of time. And I'm just going to ask that you have grace with me so that I can get this planning done and really get going for next year.
Yeah. And I'd even step back further. and your manager needs to be able to sit around the table with everyone, finance team, the program team, and be that advocate for your frontline fundraisers and say, here is what my major gift officers or my mid-level officers are going to focus on. They're not going to do the event stuff with you. They're not going to put, put table mats on the tables for the event. They are focused on their donors, and that means this. They're not going to be in all kinds of meetings. They're going to be out talking to donors. They're not going to, go to every event. They're not going to do, they're not going to run and take the CEO to the airport. Those kind of, it's just, you have to be that advocate right up front to say what it is your frontline fundraisers are there to do. Not all this extra stuff. It's about the donors.
Wonderful. We had a question. I know you illustrated this a little bit in that story that you were just sharing, but there was a question about how to use the CEO, especially in kind of more of a transformational ask situation, but really, I think across the whole strategy, when you're really doing transformational planning, how do you use the CEO, maybe the CDO, other people on your team effectively?
Yeah. Well, as a major gift officer, you're really you're the bridge between that donor and the need. So you have to be thinking about, what are all the resources I need to make this all happen? And one of those could be the CEO. And many times it is because, they have the vision and passion for the organization, for the mission. And hopefully they're really articulate about that, and that they love to talk with people about that vision. And so many donors, especially those that are going to give 6-7-figure gifts, want the leader in the room. They want to be asked by the leader. And so as the major gift officer, your job is to ensure that the CEO has everything they need to be able to deliver that ask, and it might be having training on permission-based asking. We've done that for many CEOs and executive directors, so they know how to do that and feel comfortable with it. But yes, you may need a program person who's right on the front lines that has all the information that will be in that meeting. So as the major gift officer, your job is to figure out who are the people in the room, what are the resources you need to be able to help that donor say yes at the end of the day.
I would add, you want to think about your donor's personality, and you want to think about the strengths of each of those other folks, right? So you've got a really data-driven, analytical donor. You want to make sure you bring in, like this, let's say your CEO isn't, they're more of a big visionary. You want to make sure you bring in some people that can really speak to that. If your CEO is just not going to ask well, and all the training in the world is not going to help, then be really clear about their role in a meeting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what you need them to share, and almost give them a script of the sense of like structure, so that they know what to expect, and it's really clear ahead of time, and why you're doing your process and how it works, so they have that whole context. And the more they're on board like that, the more they will be an asset versus get in your way of having good conversations.
Thank you both. I need to do a quick birthday announcement as requested in the Q&A box for Greg. So happy birthday, Greg. Everyone can say happy birthday to you in the chat. Thank you for being with us on a webinar on your birthday. I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
We had a great question about how you can really try to build in meaningful connections with a donor that's maybe been treated poorly, or that you're trying to salvage that relationship and rebuild that trust. And how do you go about that? Especially if maybe you're new to that relationship. You weren't part of what happened, but now you have this donor that you're trying to connect with.
Yeah. Well, first it's an advantage to be new, because you can apologize. You say, I recognize that in the past you've not been treated well. I've seen this, and you definitely have not been treated well, donor, and we're sorry for that. And it's a new day, and I'm here to let you know that I want to help rebuild that trust with you. Just say it right up front.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to get to know you. I want to understand why you're passionate about our mission. I want to understand, you know, why you were hurt, figure out all that stuff. Just get it out there with them. And then because you're new, they can't, they can only say, oh, the donor's feeling like, okay, they want to start over. And so you're giving that donor a real good shot to wanting to start over. And it's actually, it's, it's like the lowest hanging fruit, I think, for a new person, someone to come in and help repair a relationship, because they can only be the good person, really, right? So, yeah, that's the approach I would take.
And if they're still upset, that means they're passionate about your mission,
Yeah,
most likely. So
yeah, that's a
I
great
think
point.
the big thing I'd add is really don't promise something you can't deliver and be really consistent with like let them know what you're doing, why you're doing it, and then do it consistently. And over time they'll be like, okay, this is different.
Right.
Great. We had a question kind of about the communication pieces. And do we recommend always including an ask or always talking about the problem? I know we had that slide with some of the examples, but if you could maybe elaborate on a bit of the mix that we recommend in a communication strategy.
Yeah, it is a whole mix. No, you're not asking probably in most of those communication pieces, you're not even asking. These are all things that are setting up a personal solicitation if you can be in front of them. Um, and so no, it's a mixture of reporting back, maybe 2 to 3, maybe update a quarterly update, but then there's thanking, there's personal things that about the donor that you're sending. There's communications that come from the organization, like a newsletter that you can personalize to them. So it's a whole mix of things, and it's rarely an ask in any of those communication pieces, unless it's a specific proposal that you're bringing to them. Um, because everything is trying to reinforce either reporting back or thanking or developing the relationship in a deeper way.
And I would add that in those, you're doing other asks, not asking for a gift. So when
Yeah.
you email them some update, have a question in there. What part of this grabbed your attention? And, so you give them, because otherwise they're going to be like, oh, there's an update. Cool. But if you're asking a question to engage them, then you can learn more about who they are.
Mm-hmm.
So we also had a question about data. So of course, data is really important to us in our approach. We think it's really the backbone of how you build a transformational relationship. This question is specifically around wealth ratings. First, kind of asking about if there are any applications that we particularly recommend. And then I would love for you to speak to how we use wealth ratings in
Mm-hmm.
our donor strategy.
We don't recommend any specific one. We're agnostic towards all the tools that are out there. And so, I mean, they're all doing this, trying to do the same thing, essentially. They're aggregating data across the country. And it's all public data, by the way. So you don't need to feel weird about using it, because it is all public knowledge. It's just all aggregated into some place for you, essentially. You could do the same thing, but it would take you a long time to do what these companies already can do. Now, having said all that, um, wealth ratings are something we use to help us build our uh, caseload pools, but it's really tertiary to giving, current giving, so recency, frequency, and amount. Just the basic stuff there is so much more important than the wealth rating. The wealth rating thing is just something that helps add, if we're coming down, we're trying to find that last 25 donors into a pool, and they might have a lower giving, but they have a higher wealth rating, that they might get into the pool to be able to qualify. And if they're in a portfolio, wealth ratings can give you some more information about a donor that you may not know. But we should also know that those wealth ratings aren't 100%. They're like half right. People who have high wealth know how to hide their wealth, and those wealth ratings don't always pick all that up. So it's just like another tool to help you. Unfortunately, universities, big organizations use those wealth ratings as the way to build portfolios. And that is the exact thing you don't want to do, because it's not donor focused at all. It's not donor centered. It's transactional in nature to do it that way. And you'll be frustrated as a major gift officer if you're handed over a portfolio full of donors based on their wealth rating capacity.
Thank you.
Don't get me going on wealth ratings.
I know.
And universities.
I know. All right. So we had another question about mid-level and how mid-level, a relational mid-level program, that's what we talk about ours as, how a relational mid-level program can help you build transformational relationships that are kind of then ready to move into the hands of a major gift officer. So I'd love for you to maybe talk about that and what's different in the way that we approach mid-level.
Go for it, Jeff.
Oh, okay. So a lot of people say they have a mid-level program, but typically that means they have a direct response program that might have higher levels of paper, different things in the direct response program that's kind of elevated than the regular $25 donor gets. That is not what we call mid-level. We have a mid-level rep that's working with 500 to 700 donors, and they're tiering those donors just like we would essentially in major gifts. And they're really focused on trying to get to know those donors and move, especially those tier A donors, into major gifts and start building that relationship, in a sense, qualifying them into major gifts. And so it's the start of figuring out who these donors are. And I think it's probably one of the most exciting areas right now in fundraising. And we work with so many organizations right now in their mid-level programs. And, we have this Slack channel here at Veritas that talks about celebrations. And I would say that the majority of them seem to come from the mid-level. They're working with a mid-level rep and they said, this donor that's been giving like $1,000 for the last 3 years, someone reached out to them, mid-level rep started talking to them, and the guy sent in $10,000 just like that. I didn't even ask yet. Yeah, we hear story and story. And why is that happening? Because there's so many of those donors in that mid-level space that have so much more capacity, but they need that extra touch, that human personal touch. And so that's what we mean by relationship building on the mid-level space. You have to have somebody starting to introduce them to a person to talk to understand who their passions and mission, what their passions and interests are. I know
We're all ready for a nap now.
Getting later.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for your great questions and for your interaction and for your birthday wishes for Greg. We're so glad that you were able to join us today. As another reminder, the email will come tomorrow with your recording link. When you click on that recording link, it will take you to a landing page. That's where the slide deck will be. And so please be on the lookout for that if you want to listen to this again. And if you'd like to start a conversation with us about how to build transformational relationships with your donors, we would absolutely love to talk to you. Definitely recommend getting started with that donor file assessment process. That is just rich data that can really speak to how you are transactional in certain spots and where you need to focus your attention. So please give that a look. The link is in the chat.
Is this our last webinar for the year?
It's the last one for the year. So
well, then we got to wish everyone a happy holidays.
Happy New Year.
Happy holidays.
Yes.
Happy New Year.
Yes. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. And we'll see you next time.